Hello, and welcome to Chapter 2 of Maintaining Creativity 8, Artists as Agents of Change. I'm Scott Walker. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Artists Network, and like most of you, I'm also an elder artist. I'm very pleased to welcome you here today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we live, work, travel, and create on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have cared for this land, now called Canada, since time immemorial. We acknowledge this as part of our covenant with all Indigenous nations to share, respect, and protect the land in the spirit of peace and friendship, and to honor the future generations of all our nations. Once again, it's a pleasure to welcome artists from right across Canada to Chapter 2, from Bell Island, Newfoundland to Bowen Island, BC, and virtually every province in between. On Monday, a couple of days ago, we got to hear the thoughts of our women warriors for change. Today, we're going to hear our second panel discuss inclusion. Where are we? Where are we in terms of diversity, gender issues, aging issues, and more? They're all up for discussion today. Now, as I mentioned on Monday, one of the ways in which we as elder artists can affect change is through mentoring, helping to guide and encourage the next generation of artists who could change the world. We at CAN just passed $400,000 in fees that we paid to mentors and expenses to mentees. And here is another example of one of our mentorships.
Hi, my name is Adam Ngoyan, and I'm a filmmaker based here in Toronto. It's very interesting when you mentor somebody that you become aware that the experiences you're having are things that actually can be passed on to other people. I do think it's very gratifying that you are a repository of everything you've done, and that you're able to actually understand your own career at a certain point, where I am now, and you're able to impart things that you've learned to somebody else. And it is immensely gratifying to be able to do that. So anything to make the process less lonely for someone else is really important.
So my name is Dorothy A. Attabong. I am an actor, filmmaker in Toronto, Canada. I'm originally from Cameroon, and I was mentored by Atom Egoyan through the CAN mentorship program. And it was a really eye-opening experience for me. It was brilliant. It was gorgeous. I don't have the words. I had a really educational sessions with him always, and I am thankful and blessed I went through that. So many golden nuggets and withholding information, and watching Atom's earlier films also, because they were low budget, and so that was wonderful to see how he was able to get those shots at that given time with the limited budget it was, which is what I'm experiencing. And so many different, oh my goodness, it would take a whole hours for me to tell you everything that I learned, but I really absorbed everything that he was telling me, and it was really quite an educational session.
Thank you to Adam Egoyan and Dorothy A. Attabong. I pointed out when we talked that both Adam and Dorothy's latest films have the word veil in the title. Dorothy's is Eye of the Veil, Adam is Seven Veils. And Adam said, yes, I stole the idea from Dorothy. I think he was kidding. Chapter 2 is going to unfold today the same way that Chapter 1 did. I will introduce our guest speaker in just a second. He will introduce today's panelists, and they will discuss today's topic, inclusion. Where are we? And then we'll begin our breakouts. They're like our online salons, our on-salons. It'll be a chance to discuss today's topic with other artists from across Canada. Each breakout will have a facilitator, last about 30 minutes, and then we'll all gather back here together to find out what each group talked about. Well, right now, without further ado, let me introduce our moderator for Chapter 2. He is, among other things, many other things, the Vice President of Indigenous Ways and Decolonization at the National Gallery of Canada. We're so glad he's joining us here today. Please welcome Stephen Loft.
Thank you so much, Scott, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited to be moderating this panel and know we will have a lively, interesting, and engaged conversation. My name is Stephen Loft. I am a Haudenosaunee man of the Kanien'kehá:ka, also known as Mohawk Nation. I am also Jewish. As well, I am a husband, a father. I'm 63 years old and a person who identifies as having a disability. Today, I'm coming to you from the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation in what we now know as Ottawa, in my basement. I am currently the Vice President of Indigenous Ways and Decolonization at the National Gallery of Canada. And for the last 35 years of my professional life, I have worked in the arts and culture sector specifically to promote, protect, develop, celebrate, and encourage the arts and cultures of the First Peoples of this land. And I'm very honored to be with you here today. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Nikita Carter, Joy Lowen, and Susie Lake. I encourage you all to read the bios of our exceptional panel on the CAN website, but I'd like to start by asking each of them to introduce themselves and also speak a bit about their own lived and professional experiences, as well as perspectives and practices regarding today's topics. So if I can invite all my fellow panelists to turn their cameras on. I hope it's just me who can't see Susie. Okay, so I'll start just with my screen, and I will ask Joy to begin.
Sure. Hello. And so nice to be present amongst all of you today. I know we're all joining in remotely, but it feels like we're making a significant connection. My name is Joy Lowen. I'm the CEO at the National Screen Institute. We are a national organization based in Winnipeg. We provide training and mentorship to support storytelling creatives from coast to coast to coast across the country. And like I say, we do this work by providing over 24 programs a year. Programs which do include mentorship. Our team is passionate about supporting storytelling creatives. And the reason why is simply because we believe that stories and storytellers are the bridge to creating a better world. They are a powerful tool that can be used to create some insights, and our work at the National Screen Institute is to support the creators who are telling these stories. I come to this work by way of growing up in small town Manitoba. I grew up in Steinbach, which was a Mennonite town in the 1970s, because I am 52. There weren't a lot of Black kids like me in the town that I grew up. So watching stories on screen was one way of me better identifying, feeling a sense of belonging and connection to Black people and Black culture. For those of you who remember Good Times, Thelma, I believe she was me. And so the work that I do now is to ensure that all of us feel a sense of belonging in the stories that are told. 81% of the creators that we support at the National Screen Institute are from underrepresented communities. Underrepresented for us is purposely inclusive. We foster an environment that encourages storytellers from, all genders, races, identities, ethnicities, experiences, and locations to take part in our programs. So I'll leave it there for now.
That's great. Thank you so much, Joy. And I think we're getting Susie's technical difficulties worked out, so we'll let that finish, and I'll move now to Nikita.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, I'm Nikita Carter. I'm a 70-year-old trans woman living in Vancouver, what is called Vancouver, the unceded territory of this Coast Salish people. And I've been involved in the music business in many ways since 1969, when I did my first gig when I was 16. And through my career, my specialization was as an improviser. I'm a composer, was an artistic director for many years, led a 15-piece band, founded and co-led a band and toured the world, an educator, and producer and co-producer, and worked with many different idioms, spoken word, a lot of work with dance, theater. And I'm 70, as I said, and I transitioned at age 63. So very late in life, and I was very fortunate in that I came with a lot of life experience to be able to deal with many of the issues which are very challenging for trans people. And I have the benefit of that, and I feel really called to advocate for trans folks, especially trans women of color who have it. It's very, very challenging in so many different ways. And so I'm learning, and I'm always trying to ask more questions and learn myself and be a conduit for growth and change. I always seem to learn from being mentored by the good situations and the difficult situations. I'm really excited to be here. And since I discovered the Canadian Artist Network the last 3 or 4 years, it's been a great way to connect with other artists in Canada. And it's been part of my reaching out to people around the world through the Transgender Archive at the University of Victoria. I've spoken there on a panel speaking about a forthcoming book I have called Both Sides of the Great Divide, you know, living 60 years as a privileged white male and knowing what it is to be, you know, decent looking, tall, intelligent and educated, and used to understanding what it is to be deferred to, and now living a life at really a different end of the spectrum. And so it's a great learning experience for me, and relaunching my career at age 70 as a writer, creating a new band. I've been an improviser in marginalized avant-garde improvised music, and I'm going back to my roots to write songs and tell stories about what I'm experiencing, to try and hopefully expose the vulnerability, to share the story of what I go through so people can learn. And I think that, you know, I learn least when someone is wagging their finger and telling me what I should do and what I should think. And so I find the best way is when someone shares and makes themselves vulnerable. So that's part of my learning. And again, I'm really excited to be here with this panel and just to be here today. Thank you very much.
Nyawagoa, thank you, Nikita. And just before I pass it to Susie, I will let everybody know that there might be some video choppiness with Susie's feed. It's not your individual computer, so don't worry about that, but the audio is really good. So with that, I will pass it now over to Susie.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for inviting me. As I'm just learning about CSARN. My name is Susie Lake, and I'm a senior visual artist now living in Toronto. And I was invited to respond from a position of ageism and feminism. My background following my traditional arts training, I immigrated to Canada in 1968 from Detroit, Michigan. It is where my feminism was really politicized by working in the downtown Detroit housing projects and community centers. Despite my traditional skills, I didn't really want to make art about art, and I didn't even know that I was going to be a feminist artist. But I knew that I wanted to make art that reflected what was happening in the street. I'm 76 years old now, and my current work addresses the aging body, and I want to actually address it as a different beauty. I've taught for 40 years, so I believe in collective discourse. In terms of gender issues, I taught for 22 years as a sessional before actually the door opened for women to be teaching full-time tenured in Toronto. While in Montreal, I was co-founder of the artist-run center Véhicule Art Inc. in 1971 with 12 other people. And later in 1978, when I moved to Toronto, I was co-founder of the Toronto Photographers Workshop, now called TPW. I'm quite excited about how the world has changed in terms of inclusivity. The project isn't over. We've got more work to do. Currently, there's a strong right-wing movement occurring, challenging women's bodies. And I think it's wonderful that there are organizations now that we have as a vehicle to actually work together and be strong.
Thank you so much, Susie. Great. Just before we start sort of the general conversation, I would just like to introduce two concepts. And I've kept the definitions purposely vague, just as a frame for our conversation. And the first is equity. So equity in a cultural context refers to the fair and just treatment of individuals and communities, taking into account their diverse backgrounds, identities, and experiences. It entails recognizing and addressing historical and systemic disparities, discrimination, and inequalities that have affected various cultural groups. Cultural equity promotes the idea that all cultures, regardless of their background, should have equal access to resources, opportunities, and representation in society. It acknowledges the importance of celebrating and preserving cultural diversity while also ensuring that no particular group is marginalized or excluded due to their background. Achieving this kind of equity involves creating inclusive policies, practices, and systems that promote diversity, foster understanding, and provide what some would call a level playing field for individuals from differing cultural backgrounds to thrive. The other concept is intersectionality. And this is a concept that was developed to address the interconnected and overlapping systems of discrimination and disadvantage that individuals may face based on multiple aspects of their identity. Originally coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a legal scholar, intersectionality recognizes that individuals are not defined by a single identity, such as gender, race, class, sexuality, disability, but rather they are shaped by the complex interplay of those identities. Intersectionality highlights how social systems and structures can compound and exacerbate discrimination. And here's an interesting quote. Discrimination is not additive, it is multiplicative, as different forms of oppression can intersect and intensify the impact on an individual's life. So this provides a framework for understanding and addressing social injustices by considering how systems of power affect individuals differently based on their intersecting identities. So how can we then encourage more inclusive and diverse advocacy and policy making, recognizing that solutions and strategies must account for the experiences of people with diverse identities? And I want to thank all the panelists. I asked them to send me some thoughts before this. And so hopefully taking into account some of these concepts, I will just throw this out in general and people can respond as you would like. But yeah, I'd like to hear from all of you. And thank you, Nikita, for this observation. How can one best be vulnerable and model the change they want to see so as to share awareness and not presume to tell others how they should think and behave? Something I think you alluded to in your earlier talk, and I'd really like us to all think about that because I think we all come from very different places in that discussion. So I'll ask Nikita, maybe if you start us off.
Sure, thank you, Stephen. Really interesting to hear where both Joy and Susie are, their background a little bit. It's helpful to kind of situate how to think about things and this conversation. This is such a rich and unexplored discourse, this examining about how to catalyze change and how to be part of that, how to model it, how to instigate. And I think, you know, I'm 70, I've produced a lot. And one of the things about producing is putting the right people together to do things and finding compatible people with similar interests and goals. And, you know, what comes from it, you can't predict, but it's part of the, you know, I think of it almost like mentoring, as in introducing people and being part of those relationships and introducing relationships. And so much of it is about relationships. In meeting all of you today, my first thought was, oh, I can hardly wait to get to know you better and find ways that we can work together and think and learn from each other. And for me, that's one of the great richnesses. And, you know, just as an example, a very close friend I've known since the 1960s passed away last year, and he was in Trudeau's cabinet, and I've known him a long time, and he used to always call me up and say, so Nikita, what's going on the ground in Vancouver? And he knows how left-wing I am. And so he's a centrist and he's a politician and he's been doing it for really a long time. But he knew I would give him unvarnished goods in a kind way, just share my perspective on things. And to be able to have the relationships over time and to build relationships over time is part of how, as we change and evolve our way of thinking, we start to stimulate our awareness and our changes in conversation with others, and others who have been doing things for a long time also, and who have, you know, connections, who are have, you know, this is the great thing about this network here that we're on, is that I'm getting to know people all across the country, and, you know, people in Newfoundland and people in the territories, all. And so, you know, my idea is, oh, gee, I should call so-and-so and ask them, you know, what's going on there, or discuss whatever. And so it's really, so much is about relationship and that kind of open sharing of resources and thoughts and growth and stimulation. And I just feel like I'm kind of, in some ways, really like a babe, just learning anew. And it's partly my transition, which has made me have to re-examine everything in a very, very different way. But, you know, one of the great, you know, not to go on too much, but one of the great learnings for me has been how women have welcomed me into the company of women in groups. There is an openness that I found, which is really different than being in the company of men. And men are socialized to be armored from the time they're little, you know, be tough, don't cry, all that kind of stuff. And it goes for women too. We've all had to be tough, and it's not an easy path. But men are really very often lacking in emotional intelligence and having other intelligences. But that's one of the ways that I've found that in the company of women, I'm able to explore my emotional intelligence and as well as my intellectual and spiritual intelligence. And so it's this finding of the different ways and the different paths of working and learning together that for me is a really rich thing. And so I always try and pull out and look at the large, how do we change the consciousness of the world? Because we're heading off a cliff. We're in really big trouble in so many ways, and it seems to be narrowing. The education is narrowing. So we have to do the opposite, which is to educate ourselves and be willing to share and mentor and make that visible and take those risks to look dumb, to ask questions that expose our naivete. So I'll let others speak now. I could talk for a while. So thank you.
If I could build, maybe not build, but, you know, as I was listening to you, Nikita, and truly you could go on, I'm happy to listen, because so much of what you were saying is resonating. And I come to this work just through, like I was saying in the intro, it's through shared stories. And I believe like that relationships develop and grow through our sharing our lived experience. You know, a story can be anything, right? It can be, you know, funny, sad. There can be all sorts of emotions expressed in it that are relatable. And listening to you share your story. Okay, so I'm you know, and I'm gonna just draw a few conclusions based on, you know, the bits and pieces that I know of you. But, you know, so I'm based in Winnipeg. Nikita's Vancouver. We're meeting for the first time. But I think your friend that passed in Trudeau's cabinet is my neighbor. I was my, you know, MP, right? So it's, so all of a sudden now, and I'll admit, Nikita, there's not a lot of trans. I do have a trans friend, but I don't have a lot of trans friends. And the sharing of the stories, the coming together to educate ourselves, and art, regardless of its form, regardless of whether it's dance, it's music, it's a book, it's a film, has the ability, Stephen, to create that cultural, like to bring the equity that you're speaking of. It is the bridge, it is the door opening that allows people to feel less armored, less guarded. You know, I mean, I was listening before the official program started today, you know, Imagine was one of the songs, and I let myself go. I'm in a hotel room because I'm in Toronto. I let Imagine, oh, right? And then OCM, I won't sing for you because I'm not a singer, but it's the what that music does to just, okay, I'm now joy. And I think that regardless of the discipline, the form, stories, our art has a way of opening us up to each other to better understand and to hopefully stop the cliffhanging that we're all, you know, that we're all headed towards. Our motto, our vision at the National Screen Institute is storytellers create a culturally equitable world. We believe that through these stories that are told by marginalized people, by people who we otherwise don't hear from, is going to be the aha, I get it. I feel less alone. I now understand that point of view in a way that I didn't before.
Thank you so much. Susie, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think that responding both to Joy and to Nikita, you know, my probably most enriching sense of sharing came from my teaching. I miss teaching. I loved teaching. With a background in performance art, I oftentimes performed it. But because I love what I do in the studio, and it's hard work and it's rigorous, and, you know, I mean, to be honest in one's work, it really, you know, does take a little bit of courage to be able to say, this is what I'm thinking about. And in terms of young students that are confused in terms of art as a career, business career, or art as passion, I think the important thing is to set a context where they love what they're doing. The other thing is to set that context comfortable enough that they're willing to actually talk about what's important to them, whether it's current, whether it's off the wall, no matter what. I mean, this is really who they are, and the authenticity of their voice is very, very important. So within that kind of dialogue, I mean, how can that happen? You know, is like talk about ways to use materials, talk about like the joy of making, but also in terms of what is coming out of their work and what they actually really want to say, oftentimes is young and a little bit awkward. And so critiques are not in terms about right or wrong or what they should do. Critiques are about what works and what doesn't work. Critiques also include things like, how can you say something when your audience isn't ready to hear it? You know, so in other words, we have the magic of our materials. We have the magic of our imagery. We have the magic of using our discipline in terms of color as expression. So the audience knows how to feel about what the bottom line emotion of the artwork is. to actually then start housing that in the students' content. So it's about marrying so many different things so that it's paced and the young artist has a voice. And I love that. I miss that when I have the opportunity to speak in schools. I get recharged by it. I just came back from a trip where it was an audience that I never expected, and I even needed a translator. And I couldn't believe that some of the students were crying because they wanted to work with me. And that was such an honor. And, I mean, talking about teaching is one thing, but I also feel that in terms of that kind of exchange, it's kept me young. I certainly don't feel my age. And it's kept me informed in terms of how they look at today's world. And it helps me transpose the vision of how I see it as an older person and how they see it as a younger person. It's a real gift.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I thank you all. I agree with all that. I will also, because this idea of storytelling as that bridge and as that place of interaction, I think is really vital. But I also want to talk about something that's become sort of key for Indigenous communities, and especially as we relate to ideas of sharing, but also this on an institutional side, and this idea of narrative sovereignty. And that speaks to not just the story and the importance and the vitality of that story, which is absolutely unquestioned, but that who tells that story, who has the right to tell that story, who's the appropriate, and when should stories not be told?
Yeah.
And when, and it can't be just about others interpreting stories. So in a gallery context, for example, we have to be very careful that we honor the voice of the artist through their work, but then who's interpreting? Who's the one who then becomes the expert? And so that to make sure that those stories have that authenticity that was mentioned, that have that grounding in who that person is, and their commitments to that story. Sometimes stories, go back generations. Sometimes they're new stories. Sometimes there are stories that are meant to be shared with certain communities. And I think these are concepts that we really need to, understand really well. And because, at its heart, all art making is about storytelling, and it should be. And it needs to be honored in that way. So I'll just add that to that conversation. Yeah, thank you all for that. That's really interesting. I'll now pass to some really interesting thoughts that Susie sent to me, and you talked about this idea of the myth of the artist as idealized in success, and you spoke a lot about how issues of inclusivity and access fed into that, and I won't read it all. I'll ask you to maybe kind of frame the discussion a bit and start our conversation off in that way.
Oh, well, I mean, the myth of the artist thing kind of drives me nuts, and I kind of almost referred to it a little bit when I was talking about teaching. And some students come to learn art to choose a career, and expect that there are earmarks in terms of progression, and others make work because they can't not make work. So in terms of my experience being in different cities, much of this, varies in proportion, but in Toronto, the notion of achievement is of course very, very strong. And I mean, the myth of the artist really comes from, what we read about New York, and, selling and being famous and traveling. And that's not really the reality of what, art practice or art success is all about. But I find that, in terms of being an older artist trying to, integrate with, different generations, I'm held with suspicion because I have a reputation and my name is recognized. And the likelihood is that I'm jet setting around the world and selling to major museums on a regular basis. And I'm old enough now, I should step aside for like the mid-career artists to kind of move in. So until I can develop a relationship with these different generation of artists, there's this sense of being treated like other. But I also see that in terms of emerging artists, in terms of aspirations of success. I was recently on a panel where a young artist wanted the panel to actually talk about sustainability, that they had an active career and were traveling on a regular basis and selling enough work that she was worried that she wasn't going to be able to do that for the rest of her career. And how she asked me what would be my advice. And, given that I, have come from a different time, I had to stop myself from saying, get a job. But, we talked about it a little bit, but the expectations in terms of what an art career is often mythified. And my concern with that is that it's sometimes, interferes with exchanges or blending or sharing or mentoring on a much more open level. On the other hand, it's also that myth making is reinforced problematically by the whole art system. I mean, the galleries tend to, the dealers tend to want the artist to look at their best and at their most successful, and certainly promote their artists in that manner, and want the artists to conduct themselves accordingly. And patrons actually want that from the artists that they may purchase artwork from. I mean, there's one thing that's wonderful when a patron will buy your work because they're moved by it, they really love it, or whatnot. And then there's the other thing in terms of, well, because you sold work to this important museum, I'm going to buy your work because it might be blue chip and I might make money off of it. So, I mean, what can I say? But I think everybody wants to believe in the myth of the artist because they want to move forward, probably for reasons with more integrity, such as communication and reaching wider audiences. But it becomes complicated.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. So I'll ask then Joy and Nikita, because I think, Susie, you raised an interesting point. We'll move on to sort of more public organized institutions after this, but how have market forces been barriers to many artists from formerly oppressed communities? And how much is that still the reality? I know, in terms of a public system, we have moved to a certain extent. Is the market changing in general, and what needs to happen there in terms of issues that Susie raises as equity, inclusion?
I have a bit of a different take on it, which has come out of some examination of some things in terms of, how do I relaunch my career, make a new band, tell my stories, blah, 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 try and, illustrate things. And I'm seeing that we're facing systemic breakdown in so many ways. and we're approaching things the way we think about how we approached them 10, 20, 30, 40, 60 years ago. And I kind of am seeing now that, you know, the first 50, 60 years from 1920 to 1960 was the era of film in the world and the new medium, and then rock music and pop music. And now young people are championing not those things, they're championing technology, and art has just become content. You hear that word over and over again, and it changes just even the role of the artist and what we're doing. And so we're kind of going through these motions of what we, you know, looking backwards about what to do and the old ways of doing it. And well, I got kids now and I want them to go to university. 10 years from now, when the food system starts to break down, the food delivery system, because it's owned by big corporations, and everything really needs re-examining. And I see that the stories we need to tell and examine are about our interconnectedness. And that will unite us in the vision of understanding of how to work together, and the kinds of stories that need to be told to connect us to our past and our values and love and being loving beings, and you know, how to do that in action in our work. And that really, when we have connection, then you start to realize that inclusivity of everyone whose stories have been ignored or bypassed because they don't pay off, they don't pay a buck, they're not powerful. Let's ignore them and leave them, you know, leave them behind because we want to make money. That's old thinking, and we need new thinking, and we need new ways to do it. And so I'm trying to just kind of imagine how to think new ways of thinking about interconnectedness and telling stories and catalyzing voices that haven't been heard. And you know, I don't know how to do it, but I'm asking, how do we do it? How do we include people whose stories, who aren't at the table, who aren't at the board, in the boardrooms making decisions? We need those people in the boardrooms. We need those people sharing stories, so we have a greater understanding than our own little siloed ways of being. Yeah. And I really, we have to open up our vision. We have to open up our hearts. We have to open up our awareness of interconnectedness. It just seems so critical to me. And we have to examine and ask questions about, is this an old way of doing things that has become antiquated under our very feet? And I'm seeing that time and again. You know, artists, it doesn't matter. We're content creators, and we're just promoting ourselves on social media and, oh, you know, trying to get hits and views and more. And we're what to make money? I mean, what are we doing? What are the questions that we're asking ourselves about why we're doing it? And what is the meaning of it? You know, what is the meaning is a really important question that I'm asking, and that I ask and I put out. What are we doing as artists? What are we doing as Canadians? What are we doing as Earthians? Forget the little dotted lines we've imagined. We're Earthians. It's one Earth. And I just feel that interconnectedness is what holds me and draws me and centers me. So I don't know if that's not really relating to that.
Are you kidding? I'm leaning in. I can't get any closer to the screen here, Nikita. That's bang on, I think. I mean, I really do at it. In some respects, I don't know that it's all as complicated as we're making it out to be. It's a big, you know, this is big, but that whole like this is where we're alike. This is, you know, I mean, and you do know how to. My heart is racing. I'm spiraling off in all directions because my mind is fired up, right? So forgive me if I'm not making sense, but there's something to be said for just genuine people coming together out of with a curiosity and about each other, and feeling a sense, enough value and belonging that they can contribute what's in them to contribute. And I think, Nikita, you're bang on in terms of, you do have an idea of how to create it. Panels like this, opening up discussions, getting people together to converse. Let's stop the doing and let's just come together for a minute, an hour, and talk. And I think the answer does lie, Stephen, to the question we need to address the gatekeepers. There for so long, the gatekeepers have all been homogenized. They've been centered in regions in our country that don't reflect the people and the regions across the country. And I do feel, I'm an optimist for sure. The cup is half full at this point in my life. We do have time to make change. So let's, there has been work that's been done in terms of creating support systems and providing funding to better enable a more inclusive group of decision makers. When I look at I was on the board of an independent girls' school for many years. It's not STEM anymore, it's STEAM, incorporating arts into the general curriculum. It's not just, music, dance that you do as an extracurricular. It's now incorporated and embedded into just the way we learn. And I think that kind of openness in the schools and with young kids from, nursery straight on up is a way of creating a generation of people that will think with a bit more heart, seeking to connect in ways that don't necessarily make sense on paper. And to Susie, your point about the myth of the artist, just last night, my daughter's 23, she's a dancer. A professional dancer. Just last night, she's, like, what is my career? Like, this is a point now where do I continue to pursue this, or because it's becoming harder, and what's the likelihood of actually making a living? Do I, what decision do I have to choose? And it is, so it's personal and it's professional, but I think that if we as a people agree that we're going to be open to the heart, to open our hearts, to meet each other hearts, that we will make a difference. And I think that there has been some movement. We don't have enough time, folks.
When I referred to, that myth of an artist in the structure, I mean, it certainly occurs completely differently in different cities. I mean, I started my career in Montreal. It was a completely different context to work in. And, as I get to talk to people in different communities, but it's true. I think that, and I mean, I've met so many people that make work because they can't not make work. They love what they do. And so therefore the joke about get a job is because I want to keep doing what I'm doing and I need to put food on the table. And this is what I have to do to be able to do it. It is a passion. It is the way that I come to terms with the world. It's the way that I actually the world actually teaches me through the time that it really takes to make a work. I start with a question in my work. And as it is giving me answers, I learn so much more than what I ever expected. And it keeps me going. And whether I, can sell something or not, I mean, that's a bonus. I mean, the problem is now as a senior, and that I've retired, I don't have that job, income, and I have to just kind of deal with the finances. And if that means that I use different materials or this, that, or the other, but the thing is like, you can't stop making, you can't stop asking questions. And if that's embedded in your work, then you're connecting with an audience that starts to actually talk back or respond back.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's, well, I agree with all of you. And thank you so for the passion. It actually kind of, I think, leads to the next kind of section, and Joy really encapsulated this, because I think, you are all right. We're not going to stop creating or telling stories, nor should we allow others to be stopped for those kinds of reasons that we've mentioned, because all those gates continue to be in place in various ways. Some have lifted in different ways, and this idea of how we support arts and culture, especially, on this land and in this country, I think is key to that. And Joy mentioned, how there have been some significant, I would say, gains in some of these structures of support, especially for Indigenous communities, for racialized communities. I can speak to that a bit because before joining the gallery, I was at the Canada Council for the Arts for quite a number of years. I developed the Indigenous programs there. And I would agree, there has been. The question now is, and it was mentioned earlier, whose voices are not at those tables, and how do we proceed? If we acknowledge that there has been some movement, we have a long way to go, which I totally agree. But this idea of coming together and now, and in this way, in this panel, in this group that is joining us today, what are the messages to those institutional players like the Canada Council, other funders, institutions like the National Gallery that purport to be supportive of all the arts on this land, when in fact they have some work to do that way. Joy also part of the lead a support organization. So maybe I'll start with you and throw that question to you.
I think, to go back to something you said earlier, Stephen, we need to check ourselves and see who's not at our tables. So the whole idea of we've made some gains. Are we as inclusive? Are we meeting the needs of others in ways that we should? All told, no. I struggle to. And maybe it's not a struggle, but recently I've identified, okay, listen, we don't have any program for disabled content creators. The whole idea of we would often cap some of our programs to an age group because we felt that, after this age, undefined, you have, you're not emerging anymore. And what we've done in asking the question, who's not at the table, because maybe this story about a disabled character isn't ours to tell, that we then broaden our horizons. And we, in the case of the National Security Institute, our core value is support. We provide support, we seek support. And the support that we seek often comes in the form of partnerships. So, regardless of whether it is a funding partner or a like industry that we're partnering with, or someone from private industry, I think that more needs to be done to, starting with the question, who's not at the table, who's not visible, who's not seen here, and doing what we can to address that through I do think training and mentorship is the key. We need to support creators, because this is hard work. This is real work, and it's tough to do it on your own. Just because you decide to write a story doesn't mean you're going to write the story. And so having the supports in place to guide creators along the path, and providing funding that supports those types of initiatives, I think will be a game changer in terms of getting those other voices to the table. I have more to say, but I'm curious to hear what Nikita and Susie have to respond with.
I'll jump in. Very provocative and picture. For me, it's always a challenge to think about how to produce, how to make things happen, and how to connect with people. And again, I come back to relationships, about asking for help and reaching out organizationally in many ways. I work kind of in the field of jazz festivals and things like that. And so it's kind of reaching out to places and finding out how people are thinking about things. And I was artistic director, co-artistic, and then later artistic director of a non-profit music organization that produced shows for local groups. And often the caveat was you could only perform in this venue or this festival if you're doing original music, and encouraging people to bring their work. Encouraging and curating collaborations generationally, another way to do that, and people in the community who are doing things. And it's kind of getting to know the people in your community who are not being seen, as you describe, and inviting them into this collaborative way of creating relationships, of feeling seen and acknowledged, having opportunities and feeling valued. Those really empower, when you get a gig and all of a sudden you get to have your name on the bill and do some things, and it encourages you to start to see yourself differently. And I think that that's part of it. Another piece in all this, and we've referenced it a number of different times, is this intergenerational piece. I have a number of different friends kind of across the age spectrum. And, there's a young woman filmmaker I met, I guess she's about 22, and had a number of conversations and did a little bit of work with her. And just kind of seeing, here's someone who's talented and bright, and but she's feeling clearly overwhelmed at the system and how to fit in and how to see herself and what to do. And kind of, I see her and I know that she's kind of frozen a bit. And I've had this conversation with lots of people who, just like your daughter Joy, is kind of, God, where do I go with this? What do I do? Those kind of life career changing moments. How do I, how do I even look at this and my place in it? And it's really difficult when there isn't money, there aren't gigs, and all artists face that at some point. How can we as elders start to have those conversations to allow them to voice those feelings, just even to get them out, because often you're just afraid of showing your fear. So you stay frozen, and then time passes, and so it's part of, I had all that as a young person too. I remember myself at 20, 25, and 30, and my way of dealing with it, was not the healthiest of ways. And I see that happening with young people, ways to kind of block your feelings. And so it's really important. One of the things I like about this network, the Canadian Artist Network, is this awareness and the conversations that are going on about reaching out and connecting generations and having people learn from each other. Because I think that this young 22-year-old that I was referencing has a lot to teach me, because, she was born in 2001, and so she doesn't know anything but the internet, and she doesn't know anything about the new reality. And for me, that came to me in my 40s or whatever it was. And so to learn from her about her view, and I meet young trans people who have such a different view of what it is to be trans now when they're 16 or 17 or 18, and me at my age. And so I bring really different baggage than what they're doing. And young trans people are seeking out community. I have a hard time meeting community. I have a hard time meeting trans people my age. And we're locked into an old way of looking at things and thinking of things. And we, as elders, need the juice and the perspective of young people as much as they need guidance and kindness and mentoring as well. We need to mentor each other, and it's not just a one-way thing. And I think that for me is something that I've always had a sense of that, but as I'm in the trenches, meeting people and talking with people, younger people, trans social groups, and I'm always the oldest one. And, I talk to these young people, and they have really, not only are they dealing with the normal 20-year-old identity crisis of who am I and separating from your parents and how to be in the world. And but they don't have, I have the perspective of been through that, and now I see it differently. But I also don't experience the way they build community and are doing it now, because it's such a different world than it was when I was you know, my building of community had a very different look to it. And so again, we're in 2023. We need each other intergenerationally, not just intergenerationally, but all different cultures and communities, people that have gone through, you know, Indigenous friends, you know, and you hear the story about how they grew up and the things that they had to deal with, or friends of mine from different places in the world and what they had to, this education, so that we're not living alone with just our point of view and see other perspectives, are part of what teaches me and allows me to think about the art that I make to help connect people.
Yeah, thank you. Susie, did you want to, thank you so much for that, by the way, very heartfelt. Yeah. Susie?
I think that, you know, the notion of who's at the table and who's not at the table, for me, I was through both of the panelists' stories, I was thinking of parallel experiences where I've been on juries for young artists. And what's interesting, you know, in terms of like the different personalities across the different regions, especially with young artists, in a way is a bit telling. And one jury that I was on was a major award for an emerging artist. And there was a lot of very accomplished, sophisticated work. And most of it came from, you know, the larger art centers. And it was work that we could easily understand because it already was aware of being part of like the art exhibition system. And there was a young artist, Indigenous artist from the North, whose work was very, very raw and very, very, very real. And as we began voting, the very accomplished work was getting the most support. And I have actually spent a good amount of time on Bear Island and have many, many close friends, and know the importance of those with a true heart. And I could see this in this young, pained artist that, I mean, she was just, she needed to make this work. And I spoke for it on what basis of language that I knew from my experience, because we were not a mixed jury. And my fellow jurors said, okay, we'll take a chance. Either she needs this break, or, you know, we've taken a chance. And I'm so thrilled. I'm sure this young woman does not know who her jury is. But 2.5 years later, she's showing really strong, edgy work at a major Toronto gallery, and she has not lost her integrity. And, you know, I mean, she came to the table as quiet as she possibly could be relative to all the sophisticated work she was competing against, and she did it.
Nyawagoa for that, Susie. It's wonderful. And I think one of the wonderful things is that we can, you know, for those of us who've been around for quite a while, we can see the change. We can see it. We can also see how much work there is to do. And it's, for me, it's actually kind of nice being able to see both sides of that now in my career. It was all about kicking doors in. Now I can also acknowledge, you know, those people from my community and other communities who have brought that to us all, and that gives me comfort. But it also kind of ignites the spark, because there are so many out there who need our support, who need us to help, and in some cases lead the structural systemic change that has to happen. And I think that you're right, Nikita, when we gather in this way, it strengthens us and it strengthens our communities. So I want to thank, first and foremost, thank the three of you for joining me today. Your thoughtfulness and the passion and the rigor that you've brought to this conversation, and to all you do, is truly inspiring. I'm so glad to have met you now, and I hope that we will be able to engage and work together into the future. I'm so deeply inspired by you. I want to thank the Canadian Arts Network and Scott for this invitation and for bringing us together. This has really been wonderful, and I am truly honored. Thank you for everyone who joined us today. From me, if I speak for my panelists, Nyawagoa, thank you in my language. Skanagoha, peace to all of us and to all of you, and I will pass it back over to Scott.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Nikita. Thank you all for, oh, what a great discussion. And there is so much more to talk about. So let's start to do that now. Let's have a little discussion about what we just heard for the past hour. Time to start our breakouts. Each breakout will have a facilitator to lead the discussions. You don't have to do anything. Through the magic of the internet, we will all be put into our respective breakout sessions. And so I may be talking to some of you very shortly. And then once we finish with the breakouts, which will last about half an hour, we will regroup and hear what everybody had to say. So enjoy your breakouts.
Should be all of your panelists now, or your facilitator is gone now.
Okay. All right. In that case, why don't we find out what everybody heard from their panelists about and talked about in the breakouts. I'll start, if that's all right. We had a lot of we had a small but mighty group, a couple from the Greater Toronto area, a couple from Newfoundland and Labrador, and one from Calgary, and representing multimedia arts, an actor, musician, and a couple of visual artists. So here are some of the things that I took down from what everybody was saying: that culture doesn't respect elders. Culture being capital C culture, the gatekeepers of culture, I guess, is a better way of putting it. So we need to figure out how to do that, how to fix that. What's been done up until now isn't working. Do we need to blow it all up and start again? A provocative question. And the follow-up question to that being, will artists, if we do blow it all up again, will we as elder artists have a seat at the table of the rebuilding process? We need to find another way forward. We need to bring more people into the fold. Canada doesn't recognize how important the arts are. And I have a funny feeling, Gary Neal, as you are going to be the moderator of Chapter 3, that's going to be a recurring theme on Friday, as we find out how Canada treats its artists versus the rest of the world. We need to break down the barriers between us. We need to approach each other more with love. The difficulty of elder artists to communicate with the gatekeepers. There's a theme happening here. Artists can reach people in a different way. We help people connect with their humanity. And we need to reach out to young people who, of course, will be running the world someday. So the sooner, and this gets back to the interconnectedness that you were talking about, Nikita, in the panel, we need to engage as elder artists with the younger artists just to start that dialogue. I think one of the panelists mentioned, or one of the participants mentioned, who is from Newfoundland, is that Newfoundland recognizes the arts to the extent that the year 2024, next year, is going to be the provincial year of the arts. So that's very cool. Dan, why don't you go next?
Sure. Well, we had a good group. We speak a lot about, you know, geographic diversity in a sense, but we had a number of people who live in hamlets or small towns as opposed to cities. So there's another way that we're a little bit different from each other, but it's also important not to be isolated. If you happen to live in a community where, let's say, you're the only visual artist, you know, you do want to be connected with other people. And we had a lively discussion. In fact, we got cut off at the time that one of my fellow board members of Canadian Artists Network, Millie Risfeld, was about to say the name, I think, of a book that would be a valuable resource for a couple of the people who were asking questions on being an ally. And so I want to ask if maybe Millie could put whatever she was going to say, if she could put it in the chat, if that's the appropriate way that she could get the word out. I didn't want her to be feel that she was cut off permanently. And see, maybe she's able to come.
Millie's with us. So Millie, why don't you jump in?
I'm right here. No, I was just going to mention when we were talking about if we're talking about gatekeepers, the capitalist system that rules everything, and we spent a lot of time talking about that. But then on the other end, what do we do at the grassroots level? What do we do even beyond arts groups? How do we connect with the people in our towns, villages, and the rest of the and I just happened to join an organization, Seniors for Climate Action Now, with an apostrophe at the end of it, SCAN. Very close to can, with an S on the end at the beginning. And it was formed in 2020 with 50 people, 50 members in, I think, mostly in Toronto. It now has well over 500 members in less than 3 years. And it is a going concern. Check it out online. I'm just looking at the possibility of looking outside ourselves at other grassroots organizations that do things on the ground. They have protests. They engage in all kinds of activities that get you out of the arts silo.
Okay. Thank you for that.
So
we had a few people in our group who were members of the Indigenous community. So we found ourselves speaking a lot about the topic of being an ally and the importance of learning the history of Canada, the importance of listening to each other, and then ultimately being able to mentor each other, which falls very neatly into the mandate of Canadian Artists Network. And as Millie said, we also found ourselves morphing a bit into a discussion about having a new perspective, some people having tried to earn a perspective outside the capitalist system, which is very difficult because obviously you still have to find a way to make money in order to put food on the table. But at least one person mentioned, kind of reducing her cost of living on purpose, which I think was giving her more artistic freedom to pursue the art that she enjoys. So that was an interesting perspective. I can end it there.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Jen Miller.
It was a fascinating conversation. And in fact, I walk away with some new perspective, which was quite amazing to me to have that in less than 30 minutes. We had basically BC and Ontario, smaller towns and larger towns, and primarily visual artists, a writer, and also an arts administrator. And it was fascinating when we started out with the arts administrator saying that she so wants to implement change. She so wants to be a part of what makes the world a better place by being inclusive. And she struggles as a leader in her community because her time is filled with arts administration. And what she loved about the conversation was that, you know, Joy, for instance, is an arts administrator, but she really emphasized the importance of taking time to have the conversations and to look beyond the checkpoints or the check marks in diversity and inclusion, and to really develop conversation that allows for change. She said that she needs the time to share stories, and it was interesting because another said that we have to make that time, just like we make time for exercise in the morning or journaling in the morning. We should make time for those conversations that can share stories that reinforce inclusivity and respect for a broader community. Then another really interesting aspect of it was that, you know, inclusivity includes ageism, or it doesn't include ageism, but to address ageism. And how one of our guests was saying that, you know, she started out as an artist, and then she had to I want to get this right, and then she had to she became a parent, and she had to earn an income, so she had to leave her arts behind. So at a much later age in her life cycle, many more trips around the sun, she was an emerging artist, but she's excluded because of her age. And others felt that, and felt that, you know, the conversation around her story would open up doors, and that conversation has to happen more significantly. And she realizes that this is literally where I learned from it, her sharing her story. And I thought, okay, what can I do in my life with the people that I work with and the organizations I work with that can affect addressing that concept of emerging artists and age. One of them was saying that just make the time now to listen to the stories, and then find a way to incorporate those stories in the bigger picture of what you do, both as an artist and as an arts administrator. So it was a really stimulating conversation, addressing it on different levels, but being supportive of each other as they spoke. And that somebody was saying that it's really difficult work, inclusion. But if we're not ready to just accept that those are the parameters and then make it work, it's not going to happen. And we all need to leap in with both feet to make the change. So thanks to my group.
Cool. Thank you, Jen. Pauline LaBelle.
Okay, I'm on.
You're on.
This was so great. Okay, so we had, we were kind of leaning on the West Coast. It was West Coast people and Ontario people, and we missed the Atlantic people, but can't have everything. So we had
I had all the Atlantic people, except for Jen.
Okay. So you're leaning on them. So we had singers, actors, visual artists, and theater people and writers. So one of the first things I asked, okay, so what about who's not at the table? And mostly all of them said youth. Youth are not at the table. And they repeated what Nikita had said, which was so important about the relationships, right? And so then this one who was in theater talked about the Western Gold Theater, which I know about. It's a really great theater company in Vancouver, and they it's for old actors, and they've done some great productions. But so he was talking about that they did a show called 17, and it was all senior artists, senior women artists, and they had to be 17. They're in a playground, they had to act 17. So they invited these young people to come and teach them. So this mentoring going back and forth, right? So the young people teaching them how to be 17. And he said what they mostly taught them was, you don't stop moving. Because 17-year-olds are always in movement. And so he said they did look 17 because they were just moving all the time. Anyway, that was so fun. And then what else came up? There were several people interested and involved with Indigenous people who have not been at the table. When you think about 40 years ago, they were not at the table. And today there is more. I'm really happy to see that. I've been working on that, and so have many other people. And one talked about this Strong Nations. It's a publishing company in Nanaimo and by First Nations. So I'm going to look that up in case anybody else is interested. We also talked about if their municipality had signed on to the UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, because that really brings them to the table. And one person, she wasn't sure, and she's very involved with her municipality, so she's going to look into that. What else are we talking about? Oh yeah, about taking risks as an artist. And so this was in response to, what if you're writing something or doing some kind of work that the audience isn't ready to hear, right? And so you don't give up, you just keep writing, singing, whatever you're doing. And eventually the audience will catch up, you know? And so that was about a social responsibility and using art as a catalyst for change, which I think we're all very interested in. And what else we're talking about? Oh yeah, so who isn't at the table? It's not just old people. It's really old people, sick and dying people. They're not at the table at all. Let's just put that out there. I've been writing about that. What else you should do? Oh yeah, and the whole thing about stories as bridges. Stories as bridges. So and Nikita, again, thank you for that. I really appreciated your presentation. And of course, it's the stories that are our personal stories that are going to help others to understand who we are and to appreciate who we are and feel that interconnectedness. So yeah, so I think that's it. It was a really good group and we all had a good time.
Excellent. That's what we'd like to hear. Thank you, Pauline. Gary.
And I invited them to the on-salons. They're going to come.
Good. Yes, come to the on-salons. We have more discussions like this and more fun. Not more fun, extra fun, beyond what we're having today. Gary.
Thanks, Scott. We had an excellent group. Everywhere from Gabriola Island to St. John's. So we were definitely across country, and we stopped in Alberta, Ontario. I think those are the only other two provinces. And we also had a good distribution of disciplines, everything from visual artist, theater, poet, photographer, musician, writer. So we had a good distribution of disciplines. I think the general opinion was that the panelists were terrific. It set us up very nicely to think about these issues and to talk about them. Like most others who have reported, when it comes to looking at who's not at the table, definitely the feeling was there is considerable ageism around the arts, and that's a big problem. We didn't talk about big cities and small cities because I guess the biggest one we had is Surrey, 500,000. We talked about urban and rural because there are some people who believe that that's continues to be a significant divide, and something that we need to challenge. And then we also talked about the potential we have from immigrants and refugees. And so those are some of the people that we thought should have places at the table who currently don't. We talked a lot about gatekeepers and how gatekeepers have divided us. And we do want to build bridges. We do want the interconnectivity that other people have been talking about, that's really fundamental to growth and development. We talked also about continuing skills development, mentorship, those kind of things. And we had a couple of examples. One of our group is from Brazil. Her first language is not English, and she is currently working in theater. And then we had another panelist who is an older artist, but who continues to grow and develop and wants to continue to do that, and is looking forward to the next 60 years. So I think those were some of the themes that we talked about. And I see Nikita has her hand up. She was in our session, so she might want to add something.
Excellent. I was going to invite Nikita, having heard kind of the response to the panel she was on, to kind of sum up and give us your thoughts about what you just heard.
Thank you.
And whatever else you had your hand up for.
It was a rich experience again. And it's really nice to hear how people were affected by the panel, which was very powerful to me. One of the things that was brought up that Gary mentioned was the urban-rural divide. And it reminded me of something that's been sticking with me for a long time and makes me really angry. And it's sort of, our system is so broken, it's moribund. We're in the new feudalism. We have the billionaires and various levels of serfs. The fact that we have people living in our country that don't have clean water, and we say, oh, well, we should study it. No, we need to do something about it. There are communities that do not have drinking water, that do not have clean water. This is unforgivable. This is not acceptable. And I just recently wrote to our city council here in Vancouver, having been on the downtown east side recently and seen yet again, every time I'm there, the whole downtown, I mean, it's just horrific seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people living and sleeping on the streets. And it's again, and the answer I got from the city council was, well, we're studying things and we're working on, no, you have to do things, and we're not doing things. And it's been like this for years, and it still is that way. We're not doing anything. We have the resources to do it. It's about the will. And if we as artists and we as citizens were angry as if it was us who don't have drinking water, and this goes back to this interconnectedness piece, which I always think of, we don't have clean drinking water. We don't have water, and our community does not have that. We need to do something about it. And this is, again, this what is our narrative as artists? What is our story to make change, to not just express ourselves and be entertainers, but to be agents of change? So, well, that's really, for me, is just really, so my heart hurts, and my anger is palpable. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I'm inspired by so many amazing people here today, and I just feel like we're sharing so much important dialogue and experience and perception. It's really, really powerful, and it's across the country. We're making a difference. These threads will be with us, and we will share this in our communities all across the country, and we'll come together again soon, so it's really, really wonderful. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, as always, Nikita, for your thoughts and for being on the panel today. And that pretty much wraps up Chapter 2 of Maintaining Creativity 8. I want to thank you all for being here today. Again, thanks to Stephen Loft, Nikita Carter, Susie Lake, and Joy Lowen for a stimulating panel, and for our facilitators for the wrap-up. I just want to encourage you to think about someone who may be an unsung hero in the arts, someone who's made a difference without receiving acclaim. The reason I mention it is because we have an award called the Robert Johnson Visionary Artist Award. It's in its 5th year, and we are accepting nominations right now. This year's winner will receive $2,500. The deadline is November the 15th. You can get full details and a nomination form on our website. The website still is csarn.ca, our old name, but it's soon to become canartnet.ca. You'll be able to reach us from both names for the foreseeable future. Hope you join us on Friday for our 3rd chapter to round out MC8, Chapter 3, The Original Gig Artist, Strategies Towards Economic Stability, moderated by Gary Neal, chair of CAN and a longtime cultural policy expert, and starring photographer and arts advocate Carl Beveridge, Quebec cultural policy expert Anne-Marie Desroches, and actor and former president of the International Federation of Actors, Fern Downey. Thank you so much for being with us today. And until we meet again, which I hope will be Friday, we wish you health, happiness, and creativity, because of course, creativity lives forever.